All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second session of B-Sides Track 2. Before we get started, a quick clerical announcement. Apparently there was a t-shirt kerfuffle of some sort. I don't know. They say check your emails if you're missing your shirt. I think there was something wrong with the XL shirts. But anyway, check your email if you're looking for one of those shirts and then take that email over to the registration table. So today we have Corey Bussard talking about use what you have. I'm sure not all of us has these large corporate budgets that we see some of these FANG companies represent. So this will be an awesome talk, learning a little bit more about using what we have and the best way to optimize this technology. So with that said, let me turn it over to Corey.
Thank you. Thank you. So just as he said, today I'm going to be talking about use what you have. So there's a lot of things that you have, and these things you may not have to go and spend money on. They're just things that you could utilize, take advantage of, or deal with to improve your security, obviously. So with that being said, who am I? In my professional life, vice president of security services for an organization called Blue Bastion. I run a managed detection and response team, a digital forensics and incident response team, and a DevOps team, just because I'm a huge proponent of automation. Who am I personally? Well, I'm a husband, a father. I'm a hobbyist. There's a lot of different hobbies that I have. And the last one on there is true. I am an alpaca farmer. I have baby doll sheep. Too many animals is what I'll say. So you'll see alpacas here or there with me. So why the basics? There's a ton of tools out there. Insert an EDR platform, insert some new buzzword term, XDR that's out there. Can't I solve all my problems with that? You can solve a large amount of problems with those tool sets. And I'm not here to say that those tool sets don't work. They do, they work very well. But what I'm here to say though is maybe you should think about taking advantage of the underlying features of the things that you're implementing to the best degree that you reasonably can before you start adding on top of that security posture with new tools. So as I said, does that mean I don't need tools? No, that is not what this speech is whatsoever. So just to say that very clearly, the key ingredient here is don't let the exception become the rule. Make the rule, and the exception the exception. If you have an XP device in your environment, okay, that stinks. Maybe you can't get rid of that, but don't let that become the rule for the entirety of your network. So what are the basics? Basics could be many different things. I'm going to point you to the CIS Top 18. It's a really great starting point. There's 18 major overarching things there that you could look into. I think one of the ones that I will say the loudest right now is asset control, discovery of your network. If you don't know it exists in your network, how can you secure it? That's the easiest way to say that, right? So that is a really great framework that you can start with, walk away if you've never heard of it. If you have heard of it, you're probably quite familiar with it. So digging into that, you want to, like I said, asset inventory is super key, and data protection and recovery, DRBC, those types of things. Things to do. I see this a lot in the industry. I see analysis or paralysis by analysis. There's too many things to do. Where do I begin? Put one foot in front of the other. Just start moving forward. Pick something, tackle it. If you can do that, you're going to slowly increase the cybersecurity of your network or enterprise. It's really hard to see, I'm sure. I added way too many things into this slide. I almost apologize. But documentation, I'm a huge proponent of it. Why is this key? Documentation is ultra key because things like network maps. I run a digital forensics and incident response team. Why is a network map important? If you're having an incident and you bring in an organization like ours, how do I know what assets you have? How are they interconnected? Do you just have one major site? Do you have fiber connecting multiple sites? What's that look like? Another fun fact about network diagrams is have a physical copy of them that you keep up to date. If everything in your network gets encrypted, so does your network diagrams. So we've ran into that. Org charts. That's going to play into another slide that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes, but how's your organization broken down? Do you have an HR department? What do they do? What's their day-to-day look like? As a cybersecurity individual, you have to understand what your organization is built from. What do the people in your organization do? Your HR people, they open up PDFs all day in, day out, right? Resumes. They're going to get all kinds of stuff like that. I'll tell you this, I came from an offensive security mindset. I won pen tests by sending HR individuals resumes that just had macros in them. That was an easy win. So understanding who your user base is and what do they do as part of their job will help you understand how you can help them become more secure as well. So talking to your user base is quite key, but also understanding what their roles inside of your organization are. Understanding these things creates a foundation for how you can also create better cybersecurity programs inside of your organization as well. Because what you'll find out is if I sit down and talk to one of my developers and they only use Python as an example, and they only use PyCharm as their development platform, I should never see things like VS Code or VS Studio on their machine. I shouldn't see C# apps running, right? So, but without that intricate knowledge of who they are, what they do, and how they work, you're going to end up deploying an EDR system and say, well, I don't know, we'll just allow it, they're a developer. And that's not going to get you to the place that you want to be. So documentation is quite key. Also understanding things like what are your most important assets in your organization? I'm going to say this two different ways because it's very important. Number one is what are your most important IT assets to your IT organization within your organization? If this server goes down, what does that mean? The second way to say that, and the second piece to note is that's ultra important is what are your most business critical assets? Sometimes those aren't the same as IT. If I lose my DC, for example, I don't have authentication. But if I lose this manufacturing device that doesn't use Active Directory for authentication, that can run without it, but it goes down, I lose millions of dollars a day. There's a major difference there. So this is where documentation becomes so key. So if you're walking into an organization and you're brand new to it, and the first questions you should be asking that organization are these types of questions. By the way, this is not like this is the exact way to do things. These are just examples. Hopefully that makes sense. So with that being said, some other good questions to ask are, what are the key stakeholders in the organization? If I have an incident, who do I contact? Who are the important players? You know, do I have developers? Who from the management side of the fence do I need to contact? Who's going to talk to the news? Heaven forbid if they get involved or if there's some level of leak to them and now all of a sudden I have to have a public response. Who's going to do that inside of my organization? So those types of questions are really, really great things to do up front. And all it does is it takes time. It's not a cost. It's not a, I have to go buy this tool set to do these things. Writing it down, understanding it. Another great one is Active Directory. I can't lean into incident response enough. I walk into all kinds of different scenarios. And one of the things that I see quite often is stale user accounts. This isn't something I see in small organizations only, by the way. I see this in large enterprises. I see this in mid-market organizations. I see this in small. I see all kinds of different things. So reviewing a couple things. Your AD accounts in general, are they being utilized? When was the last time they were used? Do I have any stale accounts out there? If so, start disabling them. Create an audit that you do this once a month, once a week, once a quarter, whatever it is. I will say this, once a quarter sounds absurd, but if that's all you have time for, that's all you have time for, and that is much better than not doing it at all. So then also, with that in mind, your service accounts, the same thing applies. I see a lot of people will focus in on user accounts, forget service accounts. Maybe I have this HVAC system. I replaced the HVAC system. It had a service account that had to do all these terrible things and had so much access. We forgot about it. We replaced it. we still have that service account out there active and live. And it had to be enabled for SNMPv1 and all of these bad things that just makes it super easy for some offensive security person to come in and just snag that and start running wild with it. Or worse, a threat actor. Creating an onboarding and offboarding process for your employees. Again, these are things that are so simple. You just got to create the process and stick to it. Creating an onboarding and offboarding process for service accounts. So creating these audits, making sure that you're checking in on them in a timely fashion, and then also staying on top of it. And anytime somebody says, I need a new service account, I need this user spun up, making sure that that happens in a timely fashion and having an onboarding and an offboarding process for that. So with that being said, we'll move on to least privilege access. Least privilege access is typically another one of those things that is just a time commitment. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So least privilege access is just one of those situations where it is a time commitment. Thank you, by the way. So to get there, you're going to spend a lot of time in AD, more than likely. You're going to spend time in your file server restricting access to those files or folders, etc. So least privilege access is a huge piece that you can spend a lot of time in with minimal budget or cost. Reviewing your DRBC plan. Do you have one? Step one. If you don't have one, create one. There's no time like the present. DRBC plans are something that are so incredibly important to your organization. And if it doesn't exist, it needs to, and it needs to right now. If it does exist, what you can do is ask all kinds of different questions around it. What happens if? Start inserting some ifs into that statement. What happens if my building catches on fire? What do we do? What happens if water rains down from the ceiling from an HVAC system onto our servers? What happens if our server room floods? These are real scenarios. So, what happens if, and those are a few physical examples. What happens if somebody gets my Veeam account, my Veeam service account? Maybe you use Veeam for backup. I hate to pick on vendors, but we see that happen a lot. What access will they have? What can they do? Can they delete your backups? Do you have an incident response plan? I'm sure everybody knows this one. I'm sure everybody thinks about this one. If you don't have it, make it. Same thing, no better time than the present for this one. This should go hand in hand with your DRBC plan. If you have it, update it. I've walked into many organizations that have an IRP plan, and it hasn't been updated in 3 years. Not a single key stakeholder that's on that document even exists in that organization. Update it. Make sure you're staying on top of that. Just knowing who the contacts during an incident is a serious leg up during an incident. Golden images, anyone? So this one kills me. Golden images. During an incident, what we see a huge time suck in is reimaging all of your machines. So you have a few options there, obviously, but something that you could just do today is create a golden image. You can get really creative with this and really specific to departments. You could have an HR golden image. You could have a developer golden image. The only requirements for this are time and space. All I need is a place to put these golden images. After that, you can start asking bigger questions like, how are we going to mass deploy? What happens if everything gets encrypted by ransomware? How do I reimage all of my machines rapidly? Those are really great questions, but make those golden images. Again, time and space. That's all you need. The next one is also very important. Talk to your user base. Get to know them. I hinted at this a little bit earlier in the talk, but this is very important. I already gave the PDF example about the HR team. That used to be my favorite. Understanding job responsibilities. How do they do their job? What applications do they use? What is their preferred browsers? These questions sound kind of absurd, and they become very useful later. You'll understand your network to a much further degree than what you ever would have before this ever happened. What do they do as part of their job? What should they never do as part of their job? Sometimes you won't get that directly from the end user, but you'll start to understand here are the things that they do all the time. They work with inside of these systems. They are a developer, they hit SQL, they hit this application server. Or maybe you have separate sets of developers that hit separate sets of applications and backend databases. Okay, perfect. So you should never talk to our HR platform. Easy enough. But you wouldn't know that unless you understand their day-to-days. Find a champion within your organization. This one's huge. It's a lesson that I've learned very, very, very much so very recently. Having a champion inside of your organization or having multiple champions. Talking to people, getting out there, understanding your user base is awesome. Take it to the next level by having champions. I have an HR department, find a champion in HR. I have an IT help desk inside of my organization, great. Find a champion over there. And the reason these champions become so valuable is it gives you a place to start testing things. They feel like they're on your side because they are on your side. They're helping you do your job and you're helping them do their job by making them more secure. So you start to create this really, really awesome system. So whenever you do that, finding champions throughout your organization, they'll be much more happy to help, especially whenever you're about to break everything in their day, right? Because let's face it, that's what we do. Defining out all those questions and writing them down. Did I say documentation is important yet? Because it is. Another big one. So I can't say how many times. I'd say maybe like 60, 70% of the IRs that I've been a part of personally have been because of this one. Log me in, remote was left on a machine, forgotten about. My organization implemented insert remote access tool. I won't get too specific. And it it was never updated. 7 years later, it has an RCE. Because of the version that it was, you could brute force it until you found the password and you were in. That happened. They were a developer with DA access and off into the races. Reviewing your installed applications, this kind of goes hand in hand with asset inventory, understanding your assets, understanding what is out there. Running things to find out what applications are installed out there. What applications, so after I've talked to my user base, I should have a pretty good understanding of what applications they use a lot and what applications they probably don't ever use. You know, I probably have Wireshark on all of my machines. I shouldn't say that out loud. I probably have Wireshark on all of my machines. Have I used it in a while? Probably not. It's been a bit. I could probably remove that. Ask questions like that. Go to your laptop, look at the installed applications and just, when was the last time I used this? Get rid of it. You don't need it, get rid of it. So you can ask all kinds of different questions around that. Another really big thing that I see quite often is looking for IT tool sets. So I just did this mass deploy of insert whatever, application, security tool set, whatever. I used PS exec to do it. It was awesome. And I created this specific folder with all my IT tool sets in it. And then a red teamer, a threat actor comes in. They're like, oh, hey, all of my tools are deployed for me. Look for those tool sets out there. If you've deployed anything, think about that. I have. What did I use to do it? Did it have a folder structure? Wipe that out. Have you had a recent penetration test or red team services engagement? Did they leave any tools behind? Because that happens. Look for those things. What happened after I had this red team engagement? Did they leave any tool sets out there? You know, Bloodhound is a really awesome tool that if it's in your network, I could probably find some ways to escalate my privileges. Firewalls. Most people have firewalls today. I shouldn't say everyone does. Not every network has a firewall. I really would like to say they do. But what do you have? If you're walking into an organization, you may not know that answer. How are you using it? A recent conversation I just had was, hey, we have all of these awesome, great next-gen firewalls in place. We have the highest levels of the highest levels, and all of the things are quote unquote turned on, but we receive threat intel from it and we're not reacting to that. Is that your organization today? Because it could be. Asking those types of questions. Okay, yeah, we have the threat intel from the big next gen firewall vendor, but are we doing anything with it? Are you using the application awareness features? Are you using all the feature sets? Are they implemented? They're there. Are they just in passive mode? Are they in active mode? Are they reacting to anything? Again, these are just things that you could go back to your organization and start implementing potentially today. Network segmentation. This one's always fun. I love this conversation because some organizations you walk into and they're very upfront. They say, hey, you know what? It's flat network. Why? What is stopping you from putting VLANs in today? What's going to stop you from walking towards network segmentation? Some organizations it won't work for, or they're very small, and there are great use cases or scenarios where it's just not going to work. But most of the time, you can walk towards network segmentation, and you mostly have things in place that could at least walk you there. So the next one, if you know me, you know that this is a huge piece with me. OS hardening. I have up here quite a few things. I'm posting this out to GitHub today as well. So this whole talk will be out there public. There's a lot of different features inside of an OS. If you're in Linux, deploying in a minimal install, focusing in on application or packages that you have installed and making sure that they're A, up to date, and B, you're only using what you need. In Windows, they've done a whole host of things in Windows 10, 11, 2016 plus, and that's kind of the focal point of what I have up here. ASR, attack surface reduction. It's features. You just turn them on. They can break stuff. There's pros and cons to this. You don't need licensing for this, by the way. You can just enable it. You don't have to worry about E5 licensing or anything along those lines. You just have to understand what it is and how you're going to implement it. So ASR, great thing, does all kinds of stuff. There's an LSAS injection technique that it can stop. I know that firsthand. During the pipeline incidents, we dealt with one of those threat actors, not for the pipeline, but we dealt with one of those threat actors that were also attacking the pipeline. We had firsthand experience enabling the LSAS injection ASR rule hot. It stopped the LSAS automated injection attack that was happening right then and there. They work. There are downsides to it, like how do I know that it's working? Where do the alerts go? Because it just generates logs, and if you're not logging all of your endpoints, then into the ether, but it's working. Controlled fuller access is another one that was recently implemented. It's something I implore everyone, if you don't know what it is, go read about it. It's really cool stuff. Windows sandboxing, enable it. Why not? There's also some cool tricks out there. I have a link in here. You can make it so you can right click on executables, PowerShell, and it automatically will give you the option to load it into the Windows sandbox. When Windows access, App Locker is what it was formerly called, WDAC now. All kinds of cool stuff you can do with that. There are tiers to some of these. Some of these are things that you can't enable all of the features without licensing for, but the base majority of you can at least do some of it. Isolated browsing, it basically starts to use, what is it called now? It's previously Spartan, Edge, whatever you want to call it, Chromium. It loads it into a VM style isolated segment so that your browsing is now isolated. Is it perfect? Is it everything you need it to be? No, but heck, it's free. Why not take advantage of it? Reputation-based protection is built into Windows 11 today. You just have to enable it. That's it. It's a little slidey bar. Exploit protection still there, still available. Let's change it into a slidey bar. Actually, I think it's in the same section as isolated or exploit protection. Core isolation memory integrity. It's part of device guard, so if you enable that, it's meant to do things like TPM, TPM v2, and hardware security. Secure boot, also in that same place. HVCI was something that I learned about whenever I was doing the research for this talk. Very cool stuff. And credential guard. So those are just some things. There's also things like removing all of the multicast stuff. Again, if you know me, if you've ever met me, you've heard me say LLM and R until my face turns blue. Disable it. Multicast, disable all of that stuff. Enable SMB signing, disable SMBv1. Out on the repository that I'll be placing this, I have a PowerShell script. You can trust me, by the way. I'm not doing anything bad with it. I wrote it to be as easy and simple as possible for you to read through and understand. It's meant to help you implement OS hardening techniques and test it is the whole reason for it. It's not perfect. It's not every single OS hardening technique, but it gets the major ones that we see either offensive security tackling every time they land in an environment or IR. Passwords. What's your password policy? Are you blushing because it's terrible? Always work on your password policy. Work with your user base. This goes back to working with your user base, talking to them. Everybody's going to be upset about creating a longer password, but they'll be a heck of a lot happier if you're their friend. So that can always make things easier. What else can you do to fight bad passwords? Well, back in the older days, prior to what Microsoft just implemented, you would have to deploy a DLL, a custom DLL for password filtering into AD. It wasn't supported officially. You can still do that in an older environment. It does work. Or in the newer environments, you can do what's called password filters in AD. It's part of Azure. It's really cool and neat stuff. So you could put things like, my organization is, insert your organization's name. Well, I'm wearing a shirt, so my organization's Blue Bastion. Nobody can create a password that is Blue Bastion, or you can generate different versions of that, right? So that's something that is very, very important. Lapse is another one that you can do that there are limitations to lapse. It can only do one local admin password, but what it'll do is it incorporates the local admin password of the machines that you put under it. It randomly generates it on a time set schedule that you set. You could have it do it every 7 days, and then it incorporates that password into AD. So it's really cool, really powerful, and I highly recommend it, and it's free. Patching. Are you patching? If you're not patching, please go back and start patching. This is another area that we see a lot of holes. A lot of things happen with patching. So one of the things here, though, is most people are patching. But the questions become, is your patching system patching properly? I just had a conversation 3 weeks ago where we found out that a patching system, and it was proactive, so this was positive. We found out that a patching system said, you're fully patched. But a vulnerability scan came back and said, whoa, we're seeing all of these really bad things available. But the patching system was saying it's fully patched. So having that double layer of audit there for patching is very important for that very reason. And that was quite eye-opening and a good time. Centralized logging. Are you sending your logs anywhere? This one, you could use open source tools. It could take time. You could use paid tools, whatever works for you. But whatever. The idea here is sending your logs somewhere. Because if IR hits, if there's an event, how do I go back and look what happened? My firewall logs could turn over every 30 minutes and it's all gone. Poof. A lot of times whenever we're brought in a day later, or we're brought in and you were popped maybe 7 days ago, and we're at the point where ransomware is everywhere. How do we know? How do we go back in time to see what happened? The other thing with logs is it gives you visibility into it as well. Even if you're not in cybersecurity, now I have a detailed list of things that happened on a machine, whether I'm troubleshooting that, whether I'm trying to figure out how this user account got locked out, whatever it is. Now I have an ability to go back and look. One thing here, to go back to a different point, you do this, make sure it's part of your DRBC plan. I've walked into organizations that got hit and their SEM solution was encrypted, and all of their logs were encrypted, so there was no going back. And then obviously always auditing and checking and validating that your logs and log sources are pushing. Very, very important. EDR, next gen AV, do you have it? So why this is up there is if you have this in place, how was it deployed? Who deployed it? Do you feel that it was a good deployment? The reason I ask these questions is because a lot of times I've walked into an organization where they have EDR. We're good. It's deployed. Look at their policies, all base level, just deployed the agent and they thought they were good. Not the truth. You want to get in there, and this will go back to those earlier points, talking to your users. How do they use their stuff? What tool sets do they use? What are your IT folks using? What are your HR folks using? Allow listing, block listing, applications. If you can do that in your EDR, allow listing and blocking things becomes a lot easier once you know your user base. And you can spend so much time in these solutions and really make your organization more secure by doing so. But going back to making sure you understand your user base. If you know them, this becomes easier. Do you have a lot of noise from that solution? There's only one way to solve noise. Dive in. Understand, why do I have noise? What's creating the noise? And that's more of a general best practice. Why am I getting so much noise? You're probably getting noise because you either don't know your user base well enough, and I'm generalizing. There's a lot of reasons you may have it, but maybe you don't know your user base well enough. Maybe a different organization, different person implemented it. They got it to a good place, and then there was no care and feeding afterwards, which is also very, very important. So then that drives you to the question, can I drive it further? And if so, how? Offensive tools for defensive teams. This is some of my favorite stuff. Disclaimer, very much so up front. If you use offensive security tools and you're doing this for defensive tactics, make sure you remove them at the end because, again, you don't want to give threat actors or an offensive security team a heck of a foothold and give them a bag of goodies just to take off with. But one of my favorite tools, I already talked about Bloodhounds, is Bloodhound. There's other tools out there like Pink Castle, Purple. I left off the end, but Purple Knight. Bloodhound is open source. You can just go download it. Another disclaimer with this, if you work with a service provider or you have an internal security team or you're part of the security team, talk to them and let them know that you just downloaded this tool set and you're about to run it because it makes people like me freak out. What does Bloodhound do? It's a tool set that can find attack paths in AD. So after you've cleaned up the Active Directory, you've gone through the least privilege access, you've driven this as far as you possibly could, download Bloodhound, pop it in place, talk to somebody who's used it. How do I use it? Deploy it, run it, see what that report says. Now I have all of these different attack paths to get to domain admins. Now I have a new set of things that I can go back and start remediating. Removing SPNs is another really big one that I see out there. You could call these Kerberos attacks, or golden ticket attacks. There's all kinds of stuff with this, but removing SPNs from accounts that do not need them, very important and easy in most instances. So if you don't know what that is, I'll be happy to talk about it after this as well, but that's another easy win. Download Nmap, free, open source, run some scans. A huge question that is typically one of the first things I'll either ask or we'll go and get permission and find out whenever we're in an incident response scenario is, what open ports do you have to the world? That question sounds like it should be answered before I even get there, and it isn't every time. So if you don't know what ports you have open externally, or you're relying on somebody else to tell you, get permission, start scanning your external fence. Just what ports are open? Then ask, should they be opened? If no, get rid of them. Then once you get through that, do internal. You're going to have a heyday. All kinds of ports. So many ports are open. That one you can spend a lifetime in. Then from there, now you've gotten your practice in a much better place. Approaching new tools. How do I approach them? The one piece here that is ultra important to me is if I'm about to review looking at a new tool set, my favorite question is, does this tool set overlap with another tool set that I already have deployed? It's unbelievable to me the amount of organizations I've walked into that have this vulnerability management platform, this vulnerability management platform. They have an EDR with the vulnerability management licensing on it. And then they have this other tool set that is an agent-based tool set that is also a vulnerability management tool. So you have all of these tools doing the same exact thing. Are you getting more value by having 5, 6 agents that are all doing the same thing? You may. There may be use cases for that. But it's a question that needs to be asked. And it could end up actually saving you money. What other options do exist other than just tossing in this tool set? Is this a buzzword? Is this a new industry buzzword that we're looking for to achieve for some reason? Or is this actually going to help me secure my environment better? Does this augment all the security things that I just did? What happens when I get through all of these things? Congratulations, you're just getting started. That's it. That's where you're at. You're at the starting line. Whenever you get through all of these, though, the one super important part to this is you know your environment better than you ever would have imagined you were going to. You know the people, you know the processes, you know the applications they use. If you talk to end users, they'll tell you what they think their weaknesses are. They'll straight out tell you. That's awesome. You can take that, you can learn from that, and we can find defenses for it. And that is sometimes the only way you'll find stuff out. I did a red team engagement where I did a physical assessment of an organization. And the first thing I was told was, there's a guy who always goes down around this time. He opens up the door to the back of the building and you could just probably walk in. I don't know. And it happened. I walked in and that was it. Like that was the end of the engagement because I was off into the races in a building that I almost had no hope of actually getting around some of their physical security. So just talking to people sometimes will get you the answers you're looking for. I'll open it up for any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. So the question was, if you couldn't hear it, golden images and them going stale, nobody's updating them. So absolutely, you implement those golden images. And the idea there is create a system, just like I said with Active Directory, create an audit period. When was the last time this was updated? Bring that golden image online, update it, run patches on it, right? Otherwise, you're going to be having to do that during an IR or DRBC scenario or worse, and make sure that it's up to date. The other thing that you need to question with those golden images is, does this have the latest and greatest applications that those users use, especially if I start to get more specific with it? So very good question. Any other questions? Go ahead. Oh, automated asset inventory. That I am a huge proponent of because it goes back to what I said earlier. You can't secure what you don't know about. If I don't know that it's there. So I'm a huge proponent of both automated, but also interviewing your end users. So doing those together as one solution. Did that answer your question? Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. Well then, oh, go ahead. Very good question. If you didn't hear that question, how do you secure those automated asset inventory solutions? MFA, hide them. Don't tell anybody about them. Put them in a secret room. Now, make sure that all of your best security practices are against all of your security tool sets, asset inventories tools, all of the documentation that you made, you need to have as part of your DRBC plan, have it physically printed out. So those are some of the ways that you could do that. But yeah, I could probably have a whole talk about how to secure your security tools. Any other questions? All right, awesome. Like I said, I'll have all. Oh, go ahead. Was there another question? You need that? No, I'm just kidding. Oh, it is. It's going to be CoreyFireBB, github.com/CoreyFireBB. You can go to that. That'll keep it super simple. And then you'll see conference resources and all of the things that I'll have in this talk. The PowerShell that you can trust me. Trust me. You can trust me. It'll all be there. I still have some of it to upload, but it'll be there before the end of the day. That was a good question. Awesome. Thank you.